Hey, so we just got done with Lake Eufaula for the Bass Pro Tour event, and it was very interesting. We had some crazy conditions there. It's early spring, February, and by all rights, it's supposed to be cold. Pre-spawn, it was really warm and had been really warm. 70s during the day. One night we even had it as a low was in the 70 degrees. But we had a lot of rain, and the conditions were changing by the day. So in practice, we had weather, rain, warm, and the fish should have been biting, but it was very tough. But what was crazy is that the water came up 2 feet. So from practice to the first day of my tournament, it came up 2 feet. From the first day of the tournament to my second day of the tournament, it came down 2 feet. And then by the third day of the tournament, it came down another foot. So it went up 2 and dropped 3 and had this huge fluctuation of the water. But with the amount of water that was coming into the system with all that rain, it brought a lot of mud. So we had fairly clean water, fairly stable water, warm weather, rain that brought tons of water and dirty water, and then a cold front after. So tons of changing conditions. So basically what I figured out was, coming into this, I wanted to fish the bank because it should have been a bank tournament with warm weather. They should have been flooding the banks in that pre-spawn to spawn mode. And so that's what I did. I showed up at Lake Eufaula knowing that I was going to fish shallow, and just figured that that's where the fish were going. That's where they were wanting to be. You always want to be ahead of where they're going to go so that they come to you. I think I might have been just a little too far ahead of that. Hindsight, I probably should have looked offshore a little bit. But that's what I did. With only 2 days of practice, you're limited on what you can do. So what I found was that really I caught them 3 different ways. A Lucky Craft 1.5, if I could find any kind of rock or any kind of a steeper little break, leading into a creek, any kind of secondary stuff, any kind of staging stuff. And I actually threw the 1.5 DRS, the deep rattle sound. I started off with the standard silent 1.5 because the water clarity was normal, fairly, kind of stained, but nothing crazy. Then it got really, really dirty. When it goes really dirty, you need to go brighter and louder. So I went with the 1.5 DRS. And that was a major player for me. I caught fish each day on it. Not a lot of fish because the water came up. And when that water came up, you're throwing to targets that are basically soft targets. There's a lot of reeds. There's a lot of different kinds of grass. There's a lot of silt on the bottom, so it's hard to keep a bait clean. The other thing I did was throw a spinnerbait. Now, the spinnerbait I throw is a Boss spinnerbait, and the unique thing about these is that you buy them in a pack like this, just the raw head with the wire. And what I do is I buy all my components from Tackle Warehouse, and what I did is I took a 1/2 ounce Boss spinnerbait. I put on a Boss skirt that I made, a white and chartreuse, and then what I did is I took a Colorado and I was throwing a double Colorado. I like 2 different options for stained water, double Colorado or a Colorado in Indiana. And what I did is I went with a silver and gold. I went with a number 2 silver, and I went with a 4.5 gold for the back one, and that white and chartreuse. So I bought all my components from Tackle Warehouse, and then I can mix and match. So I have this same spinnerbait right here that I throw with double willows. I throw a tandem willow Colorado. I'll throw a double Colorado. I'll throw a Colorado and Indiana. So I take these blades or these actual raw spinnerbaits and I make whatever I want. And it's super simple. You buy the clevises, the blades, the beads, everything. I can buy all kinds of colors of blades from Tackle Warehouse and do whatever I want. So I can match the hatch with the conditions. And that's what I've done with my spinnerbaits. And then I'm not worried about what I need because I have all the components and I can make what I want right then and there. So quite a few fish on the spinnerbait with those changing conditions, the stained water, and the targets that I was throwing at. That's what I was covering water with a spinnerbait. When I got around the rock, I threw the 1.5. Now the other bulk of the fish came flipping in 2 different ways. Really a lightweight and a heavyweight. I had areas where I was punching And when I was punching, I was using a 1 ounce arc tungsten weight, flipping weight. And when I got to the sparse stuff, and I always say sparse stuff, it was either wood laydowns or I was fishing a lot of reeds. There's shallow reeds inside Lake Eufaula. And when that water was up, I was able to fish them. On the final day, that's where I got burned because the water dropped 3 feet. And where I'd been catching fish the previous days was literally dry land, and I couldn't fish those spots. I kept thinking that I could run into those fish that had pulled out and would stage in the areas just outside of there, and I never ran into them, and struggled a little bit because of that. But when I did that, I threw a 3/8 ounce arc tungsten weight, and with both baits, or with both, the heavyweight and the lightweight, I used a Gamakatsu heavy cover hook, the flipping hook. Now, for the lightweight, I threw the heavy cover 4/0. With the heavyweight, I threw the super heavy cover 4/0. And I used the same bait. I used a Yamamoto it's actually the 475 flapping hog. It's a 4 3/4 inch flapping hog. And what I do is I take this bait and I pull all these top legs off right here. So it's a little bit slimmer profile. And that's the bait right there. The thing I really like about this is it's a pretty wide bait. And what happens is it really likes to glide when you pitch it in. With the heavyweight, not so much. You're looking for a reaction strike, that 1 ounce when it comes flying through that matted vegetation, it's more of a reaction. With the lighter weight, the 3/8, when that bait hits the water, it likes to plane and move. Instead of just dropping straight to the bottom, when it hits the water, it likes to kind of twirl a little bit, spin a little bit. And when I hop it, if I climb it over something, when it climbs over, it likes to turn and fall and plane. And any kind of directional change like that, I think you get more bites out of it. So that flapping hog, the Gamakatsu hooks like that. Now, as far as the tackle that I use, the rods, reel, line. Now for the 1.5, I threw my Tattoo Elite rod that I designed. It's a cranking rod. It's a 7.2 medium action cranking rod, glass rod. Any kind of crankbaits I throw that, I really designed that rod for throwing that Lucky Craft 1.5. And what I use for the reel is the brand new Tattoo Elite, made by Daiwa. It's a distance casting reel. It's great for throwing crankbaits. With crankbaits, you really want to get a long cast. And not only for a long cast, a lot of times with 1.5, you're making a short cast. It's so little effort to sling that thing and make it go a long way. So I'm making the same cast that I made before, but with less, inertia on it, less action to it. I can make it just a tiny little cast and it goes the same distance if I made a hard cast. For short targets, it's great. You just barely sling that thing and it goes. If I was throwing a deep diving crankbait, now I can make a farther cast and get that bait deeper. But the Tattoo Elite lets me do that because it's a distance casting reel. Now I use the same reel for the spinnerbait, but that time I threw it on my 7.3 multi-purpose medium heavy action rod. That's what I always throw a spinnerbait on. Same exact reel for the same reasons. Very little effort to make a good cast with it. It's very smooth. The frame on this is very durable. The gears are going to stand up for a long time, and it feels smoother because everything is basically just has tighter tolerance. So the Tattoo Elite for that. Now cranking, I threw Sunline 14-pound FC Sniper. For the spinnerbait, I threw 20-pound FC Sniper fluorocarbon, and that was basically the setup for throwing those two. And then for flipping, I used the same rod. It's the Ishman Row 7.6 flipping rod, Tattoo Elite. It's such a comfortable flipping rod. It does not feel like a flipping stick. It's very lightweight in hand, and it's very versatile. And by versatile, I can throw a 1/4 or 3/8 ounce and pitch with fluorocarbon, or I can throw an ounce and a half weight and accomplish the same thing with one rod. Both of those I threw with the Tattoo Elite, the pitch and flip model. So this right here, it's a very shallow spool. When you're flipping and pitching, you do not need a deep spool. So it's a very shallow spool, which means it's very smooth, fewer backlashes because it doesn't have that heavier spool in the middle and have that overrun when you're flipping and pitching. The other thing I really like is the 100 millimeter handle with these big knobs. It's really smooth, especially when you are throwing that heavy weight and you get them balled up in something. I don't feel like my hands slip off the knobs as easily. And it just, with that big power handle, it feels like you have more leverage on the fish as well. And I've been really impressed with the flip and pitch model. For the lightweight, I was throwing 22-pound shooter Sunline fluorocarbon. And then for the heavy one, I was using the braided line, the new Plasma 50-pound with that same reel. So it worked out great. I ended up in 25th for the tournament. I got some great points. Hindsight, I should have done some things. You know, it's hard to know what to do with that changing water level. I should have fished a little bit more off the bank, finding those fish that were back behind the ones. I was too far ahead of schedule. But with only 2 days of practice, it's tough to do that. So worked out, had a great time. I had some really interesting things happen this week using the new Garmin Panoptics, and was able to see fish in brush piles, and on that shallow laydowns was able to catch them. So overall, really a lot of fun and a good week. The Panoptics was cool to see that stuff and see those fish up there and be able to catch those fish. It's hard to believe that you can look at a laydown of 4 feet of water and see a fish laying there and be able to pitch to them and catch that fish. So pretty crazy. But hey, all the stuff, I made a wish list for Lake Eufaula here on Tackle Warehouse. So all the stuff is available right here. Click on my wish list and look at every product I used for this tournament. And if you're going to Lake Eufaula in the spring or other lakes with similar situations, I promise you this stuff will work. That wish list will be right there on Tackle Warehouse, just waiting for you guys.